Assalamu alaikum fam, hope you're doing well. We're continuing our reading of Niccolo Machiavelli. By the way, just because I've had people impersonating me, my channel is PhilosophersCorner, right? Yeah. If you see anybody pretending to be me, warn them please so that they don't get phished. Because usually those are hackers who are gonna get you to click a link and then they'll phish your device. So beware, okay? And no matter which channel you're on, always be careful of clicking links. You don't want to ruin your computer and give all your data to cyber criminals. Okay, fam. So, we're in chapter 6 on new principalities that have been acquired by one's own arms and prowess. Alright, so by your ability in war and by your weapons and your new territories. Alright. No one should marvel if in speaking about principalities that are completely new with regard to their prince and their institutions, I will adduce the great examples, since men almost always walk in the paths beaten by others. Oh, look at that. Men walking paths that have been beaten by others. So beaten gives you this concept of like they've treaded it, they've flattened it, they've paved the way for you. So it's smooth sailing because someone else has already traversed it and done the heavy-handed work that had to break it all down so you could do it. And proceeded in their actions by imitation. So, saying that you went about your way doing it because you imitated it, not because you were the trailblazer, but you were the follower. It's almost like this sort of mimetic way he's arguing here. And since they cannot always keep on the other's paths, or attain the level of skill, virtue of those you imitate, a prudent man should always enter by the paths beaten by great men, and imitate those who have been most excellent. So look at that. So you may have a beaten path, but you might go on it and then totally screw it up because you don't have the skill, aka virtue, to do it. You're copying it, but it ain't you. So you're gonna have a problem. So he's saying if you're prudent, if you're really someone who pays attention, you will try to do your best. You're going to try to excel in your excellence in such a way that you can actually follow those who came before. So that if his own skill, virtue, does not come up to theirs, at least it will give off something of the odor of theirs. So give off the odor. He's like, hey, you may not be able to do it, but maybe you'll have a little element of it. Maybe you'll be able to do something instead of just nothing. Oh, Nico. And he will do what prudent archers do when the place they wish to hit appears very distant. Knowing the strength virtue of their bow, they aim much higher than the target they want to hit. So notice this. He keeps mentioning, strength and virtue. So first we had skill and virtue, right? And then the level of skill and virtue. And now we have the strength and virtue. So he's using the bow as an example. St. Thomas Aquinas also uses the bow example. A lot of people use the bow and arrow as a really good metaphor and literal analogy to kind of get you to see how you can have your bullseye ready, but you gotta really make that mark, right? It's a long distance type of interaction between you and the object that you're trying to strike. Hunters, for one, really aiming for that kill shot. That's why hunters, and even snipers in the military, they really are about precision, right? Not just like just spraying everything. It's more about like, hey, you gotta check right there. So when he mentions how if you have strength and virtue and you're using it in your bow, you're targeting the way you pull it back, right? How much you should pull back, but also when to release. So it's not just about pulling it and just shooting your arrow anywhere and hoping you get something, but it's rather knowing how much precision to put on your pull and push, when to have your patience, and then when to let it out. So it's a very interesting tactic because you can get the offensive, defensive strategy from this analogy. Not in order to reach such a height with their arrow, but with the aid of such a high aim to be able to hit their target. So some people have mentioned like what he says here, and I think they probably got it from him and others, you set a goal rather high, but sometimes you can make your goal higher than what is actually maybe attainable. So that way, when you don't succeed and you hit it just below, you won't feel as bad because you still got your high goal. It's just you didn't get as high. So aim high, and then you'll get something that's just as good. But if you aim too average and then you fail, you're going to be quite sad. So that strategy has been mentioned by a lot of people who try to achieve a lot of things on their lists, and have a bucket list, and they have an agenda they need to get across, and they have this way in which they go about it. So that's something very popular. So Machiavelli has a point here for us. I say then that in completely new principalities, where there is a new prince, one encounters more or less difficulty in holding on to them, depending on whether the one who acquires them is more or less skillful, virtuoso. Okay, so when you get a new principalities, you have a new prince, you can either have, he argues, have more or less ability to hold on to it if you have your skillfulness intact. So he's saying here, if you have less skill, less virtue, he calls it, you're going to lose that newly acquired territory. But if you do have your skill, you're going to keep it, which we could say pretty common sense, but he lays it out for us in another plain manner. And because the transition from private individual to prince presupposes either skill or fortune, so here you have fortune or skill. It appears that either the one or the other of these two would, in part, mitigate any difficulties. Nevertheless, he who has depended less on fortune has maintained his position better. Haha. Okay, so he's saying right here, you're going to maintain your territory by your skill and virtue or fortune, right? So here, he's arguing if you want to mitigate any difficulties, you need to make sure your skills are up to tact. Because if you got the skills, something may be difficult, but you can slice through it like butter. You can maintain it. It's not going to be as difficult because you've perfected your finesse. But if you have a difficulty and you say, I'm just going to leave it up to fortune, if you're not really putting in the work to maintain it. Remember, this new acquired territory point he has gotten into pretty extensively. So you're going to maintain your position better if you depend less upon fortune and more upon your skills. So, very interesting example here. It also makes things easier if the prince, because he has no other state, is forced to come and live there in person. So look at that. He's saying it's better and easier if you actually live there in person to rule and hold on to your territory. But to come to those who have become princes through their own skill, virtue, and not because of fortune, I say that the most outstanding are Moses, Cyrus, Romulus, the Theseus, and the like. So he's saying Romulus as an example because Romulus and Remus, they were the founders of Rome, mythologically. Were they real people? Most likely, but the legend goes that they were suckled by a she-wolf. There's a lot of Roman myths around those two figures, but they were the founders of Rome. Moses we know, and such. It's quite an interesting way as he says that these are the figures you should look at. They're very outstanding, and us Muslims, of course we know Musa Moses is one of the greatest. But it's interesting he brought Moses up because that's due to God. God is different than fortune. God enacts the fortune, right? But we'll see how he goes. And although one should not discuss Moses, since he was a mere executor of the things he was ordered to do by God, nevertheless he must be admired, if only for the grace that made him worthy of talking with God. Aha! Okay, so he cleared it up here for us, right? So Moses is executing orders of God, but if you look at how he did it, and the way in which he earned the right to even speak to God, and God saw him as someone being fit, that in and of itself should make you see that there is something to admire in Moses, which we religious people agree, but he's arguing with people who might not be of our faith, right? But let us consider Cyrus and the others who have acquired or founded realms. So founding of realms. So this is our realm, right? They have kind of that medieval tone to it, right? You will find them all admirable, and if their particular actions and decrees are considered, they will not appear different from those of Moses, who had so great a teacher. And in examining their actions and their lives, it will be seen that they receive nothing from fortune, but an opportunity. So here, he's contending, you look at their actions, you look at their lives, and you'll see that fortune, he's calling it, gave them opportunity, but they're still going to need to have that virtue, right? Which gave them matter into which they could introduce, or whatever form they thought fit. And that without the opportunity, the strength, virtue of their spirit would have been extinguished. So essentially saying, they were presented with the opportunity due to fortune, but they also had to have the strength and virtue to carry it out. If they didn't have the strength and virtue and it was just fortune, they're not going to get it, they're going to fail. It's not going to be alright. So you had to also have the ability and the virtue to take advantage of the opportunity that was presented. You see? And that without the strength, virtue, the opportunity would have come in vain. So, again, if you don't have the strength, the virtue, essentially, the opportunity is just like vain. It's not going to add up, right? If I give you a horse that's a war horse, but you never ridden a horse before, is that horse really going to help you in the battle that's pending, right? I mean, the horse might listen to you, but you won't know how to really steer it, right? If you are given a weapon and it jams and you have not been taught how to unjam it because you ain't got that skill in shooting, well, you're going to have a problem, right? It's going to jam, you won't know how to behave, you're going to get in the way, you're going to have something lacking there, essentially. So again, he's contending that you should actually marvel people who are worthy of it, who have the skill and virtue. And you should try to imitate their example, and that you should also improve your own skill, and that even if it gives off just the odor of theirs, it's still going to help you, and that you need to be prudent in that, and you need to have strength in that way. And in order to reach that height, you have to also aim higher and be prepared to go a couple notches down. But essentially, you should be aiming for a higher thing, and doing so shows you have ambition, shows you're going to try to make your mark, you kind of try to hit your goals, right? Very fascinating, because he gave that example. Like, if you want to hit that rabbit right between the eyes, you're going to kind of put your arrow up because you're going to calculate for the wind. You're going to try to say, okay, where are we at? You try to predict where the rabbit's going to go, not where the rabbit is. Because you could say, I'm going to fire at the rabbit, but he's moving and my arrow will not go where he once was. So I have to predict he's going to go left or right. How high do I put it? And then get the rabbit right through the eye, right? So him using that bow and arrow example is quite potent. So he definitely has some advice for us would-be dictators. I just can't. Alright, fam. Hope you learned something.